we're already hearing from some, not all, that LSU seems to be the favorite of some of the writers, broadcasters about winning the West. I don't know. Maybe I'm a traditionalist, but I still believe it will be Alabama selected to win the West. Where are you on the debate that really doesn't matter, but we'll be talking about anyway?
I think Alabama's going to be the pick to win the West. I do think that there will be plenty of people who pick LSU. And I think this really goes back to 2015. 2015, we had Auburn as the pick to win the SEC, but Bama was still the pick to win the West. I still don't really get that full breakdown, but nonetheless, we know how that played out. Auburn went 2-6 in conference play. It was the Jeremy Johnson year, and it was just a disaster. Since then, Alabama has been the pick to win the division and win the SEC every single year. You talk about really interesting storylines. One that I probably should have brought up. Is Georgia going to be the pick to win the SEC? The two-time defending national champ who hasn't been the pick to win the conference in 2 decades? I mean, is Georgia finally going to be the pick to win the SEC? I think that's really interesting in seeing how people react to Alabama potentially getting slighted, because the last 3 instances in which they were either not picked to win the division or not picked to win the SEC, all they did was go on to win a national championship. Is this going to be a year like that? Is this going to be when the yummy rat poison, as Nick Saban likes to talk about, is it going to surface right now with SEC Media Days, with potentially LSU being picked to win the West? Because if we're being honest, LSU has fewer questions to answer than Alabama, and LSU is the defending West champ. So in theory, one would think LSU should be the pick to win the West, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the case, because I think nobody wants to be the person that picks against Alabama and ends up being wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's a big part of it, and you would go broke picking against Alabama in the last 17 years. So where are you on that question?
You know, I'm not in the position that you are, where I just blindly pick Alabama to win a national championship every single year. I'm not at that level.
You might stay tuned this year for a different answer.
I know. I'm picking. And you teased that. You teased that on my airwaves as well when you came on the Saturday Down South podcast last month, and you talked about how you might just have a different pick. And when you pick Georgia, we will go back to this moment. We'll say, see, you told everybody that you weren't picking Alabama this year. But look, I think that Alabama winning a national championship, if you're saying that in the preseason, it's the most blind faith that one can ever have in Nick Saban. That's really what it comes down to. As of right now, I am picking Alabama to win the SEC West. Do I feel particularly great about that this year? No. Do I still have faith in Nick Saban that he can put together an 11-1 season? He can have a vintage Alabama defense, which, oh, by the way, still has a ton of talent across the board that we're probably not talking about enough, despite all the spring game struggles at quarterback. And can we see a world in which Alabama is once again playing in Atlanta against Georgia for an SEC championship? Absolutely. These people that are saying that Alabama's fallen off the face of the earth, it's like, look, these last 2 years, I think the standard is so unbelievably high that 10-2 does feel like it's falling off the face of the earth, despite the fact that it's a top 5 finish. So I don't think that Alabama, if you're pouring dirt on their grave at this point, I think it's still a bit premature, despite the fact that, yes, I think all those questions are there.
There's so many things that come up about Nick Saban, you know, from callers, from media people, some of your brethren. I mean, forget, you know, doubting him. I mean, they've written him off. You've heard the rhetoric. Why do you think that is?
Because there's Bama fatigue still. I mean, when was the last time in this business in which there wasn't Bama fatigue? Now, I think there's also a little bit of this frustration after the way that Nick Saban handled last year's playoff snub in his eyes. And to me, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard Nick Saban say was what he has continued to bang his drum about, and what he said with Joel Klatt, this past week, going on his airwaves and talking about how if they had gone – that they should have been in the playoff because they would have been favored against 3 of the 4 teams. That to me is preposterous, like absolutely ridiculous, and it gets my blood boiling just thinking about it, considering Alabama was a 2-loss team who didn't beat anybody that had fewer than 4 losses last year. And if you think that we're living in a world in which you should just be in the playoff based on who's favored, I've got news for them. 12-1 TCU still probably wouldn't have been favored over a 3-9 Alabama team, because why would the odds makers make Alabama an underdog? So I realize that's kind of a separate tangent, but to me, I think it's little comments like that that make everybody on the outside want to pick against Alabama, because for a very long time it felt like the boring default pick, and people like seeing the death of the dynasty, and this is what, in the eyes of many, it should look like.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.